What opening chess gambit do you see often at the highest level? The World Chess Championship is underway, featuring Magnus Carlsen versus Jan Nepomniachtchi, Russian number 1, world number 4. Why should you watch this video? You are going to learn how Magnus Carlsen plays this gambit, even when the queen's off, even when he's a pawn down, which does not even matter. You are going to see Magnus play dynamic moves to keep the balance, because he's played this gambit. He sacrificed a pawn. What is the name of this gambit? It's the Marshal. Let's check it out. Here we have game 1 of the World Championship match. Nepo versus Carlsen. Both players start with 2 hours each on the clock, plus 30 seconds per move. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5. We have the Roy Lopez or the Spanish opening. Every top player has played this opening, either from the white or the black, or with both colours. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, attack the centre, but now castle. Here we go, bishop e7, rook e1, defend the centre, b5, the bishop goes back to b3, and now castle. We are 2 moves away from the Marshal Gambit, and this is what I mentioned at the start of the video. You're going to learn how Magnus plays this gambit at the highest level. If we play the normal move, as shown with the green arrows, c3, then we go d5. Magnus is planning to sacrifice the e5 pawn. Take, take, and if white takes this pawn, which is what normally happens, take, 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 c6, we get this situation. The bishop comes to d6. The queen can come out to h4, and it is one way for black to play. However, Nepo doesn't really want to go for this today, so he goes h3. He plays a useful move. Now knight a5 is played. You may have been asking, why not d5? What on earth is the difference? Take, take. There's a subtle difference. h3 is more of a useful move than the move c3, because after take, 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 it looks exactly the same as before. This knight can come into the game faster, whereas in the other line there was a pawn on c3. So if we compare h3 and c3, h3 is a more useful move. Magnus doesn't go d5 at the moment. He goes knight a5, which looks like an awful move because you are giving up the center pawn. But you're giving it up because we are going for the Marshal Gambit. White takes, take, take, and bishop b7, attacking the center, and d3, d5, blowing open the center. d5, this is the first move in the Marshal anyway. If we go back here, just got to mention, you can't play d5 straight away. You've got to put the bishop on b7 because knight c6, you attack both the queen and the bishop. The queen moves, take, take, take. Rook attacks the queen, queen moves out the way, and now c4. You're defending your center. So going back to this position, you can't do this. Magnus grabs the bishop, take, take, bishop b7, attack the center, d3, d5, smash open, take, take, queen d5. You are threatening checkmate on g2, and Nepo stops it with queen f3. Good move. You can't move the queen out the way because you lose your bishop. That's why bishop d6 first, attack the knight, and the cool thing is Nepo doesn't actually have to move it. He goes king f1, getting the king into the center already. Nepo knows that the queens are coming off, so he's getting his king closer anyway. Rook b8, fascinating move. The rook actually defends the bishop. So when Magnus does this, he's forcing white to trade queens on his terms. If it's black's move now, the queen can actually move out the way, and then the bishop is incredible on this diagonal. That's why white now trades queens. Take, take. We have a perfectly placed knight in the center. The knight can come to b4 to attack c2. That's why Nepo has to play bishop d2 to guard the b4 square. c5, gaining a lot of control. When I look at this position, I do not feel like black is even down a pawn. All of his pieces are so active. We have a wonderful knight in the center, a couple of well-placed bishops. That pawn is very important, controlling d4 and b4. This rook can come back in the game. You can kick the knight away, get the king in the center. Knight f3. Nepo deliberately goes back. Knowing f6 might come, you're going to get hit anyway. Rook d8. This is the first surprising move. You might have been thinking maybe rook e8 or rook c8, but rook d8. Rook d8 was chosen. Now the queen's off, the rooks can come back into the center. By the way, remember the rook was there to defend the bishop. Rook now comes back in the center. Putting pressure on this pawn later. It looks like It doesn't even look that good a move. But in a few moves, it just makes sense. Because later, Magnus is planning this rook is going to come to c8. So then couple of rooks on the c and the d files. Knight c3 played, and now knight b4 attacking pawn and rook c1 defending. Keeping this rook on the a file to keep an eye on the a6 pawn. But if we go back, this was a very subtle point mentioned by Anish Giri and Judith Polgar on the Chess 2014. Maybe Anish is mentioning time to win a psychological battle. Maybe why should play rook c1 first? Just waiting, not giving black what he wants, not giving Magnus knight b4 to attack c2. If you go here now, this is what Anish mentioned. Take, now knight d2. Big difference. Knights now defend each other. There's no chance for black to double pawns, and you can get your pawns rolling. It is 4 versus 3. White is the one who's trying to create something on the queen side. So that is a very subtle point. Rook c1. Now, you might want to try to win this psychological battle. You don't play knight b4. You play another useful move, maybe rook c8 or f6. Let's say rook c8. This bishop. If you go here, then we're here. Then the knight actually sits well. Maybe we play a move like bishop a5, attack the rook. Now you might be thinking, so what, the rook moves. Now knight c3, and here we go. Now we see the vital difference, the subtlety at the highest level. If knight b4 now, this knight can go, and then knight e2. This is another point, when the rook is on c1, you defend c2, the knight moves out the way. This is not a problem, you double the pawns, and white might try to get in c3, trying to break free. Create a pawn break. So very subtle point mentioned by Anish Giri. Dutch number 1. Knight c3, knight b4. Nepo plays the normal move. Attack the pawn, defend, and rook c8. Now Magnus's rooks make complete sense. Knight e2, here we go. Nepo is planning to capture, so knight comes back, and bishop e3, we need a pawn break, is 4 versus 3. I said before, it doesn't really feel like black is down a pawn, but if white can get in d4, well then he's going to feel it. 4 versus 3. Knight comes back to e7. This is a great move. Coming into f5 to control d4, but more importantly, getting this bishop in the game as well. Now he plays bishop f4. It looks like a complete waste of time. What is the difference, you may be asking? If we go back 2 moves, why not bishop f4? It makes sense for white to play this move because you want to offer a trade. Bishop back to f8. That's the difference. And looking at the green arrows, let me try to explain every single one. So this knight is very well placed, controlling d4 and b4 along with the pawn. This bishop can come alive. We can put the pawn on f6 to control g5 and e5. The king can come into f7. Later we can get our pawns rolling, and the 2 rooks are very well placed in the center. So that is the subtle point. If you go knight e7, now bishop f4, what's the difference? This bishop can't actually come back to f8. Notice black is pawn down, he doesn't want to trade. So bishop f4, what a move. Now lots of captures happen. Anish Giri, he also said a very interesting point here. The good thing about the bishop pair is that you can give it up. Now's the chance. Now's the time Magnus actually gave it up to give white doubled pawns. Take. So double pawns, you could say. But the b pawns are not so bad. They are defended by the c pawn. Take, and rook c6. Got to defend the a pawn. Rook e1, attack the knight. Knight f5, couple of options. The knight can come into h4 to d4 to attack f3, so c3 has been played. Knight h4, you attack the pawn. Rook e3, defend from the side, and now king f8. Knight g2, trying to flush that knight out. No trade. Remember, black is down a pawn. Knight f5, and rook e5, attack the knight, and g6. Black is still down a pawn. Doesn't really feel like it. There's still so much work to do. Doesn't even feel like it, to be honest. I've said this many times. It's because the pawn breaks for white are so difficult to achieve. And if you can't get this working, 4 versus 3, then it may lead to a draw. Knight e1, knight g7, rook e4. Nepo is going for the break now. b4, but Magnus sees it. He sees Nepo's plan and goes f5, attack the rook, and now knight e6. Just going back here, I just want to talk about what Alina Lamy mentioned. I am wife to Owen Lamy, Dutch GM. On Twitter, Alina mentioned if knight e6, b4. Now you don't want to go for this because take. Now we've got 3 versus 2. Now white is much better. If f5 now, you might be thinking here, take. Well, these pawns are awful. No. In this position, you go take. You sacrifice a knight for a rook. Take, take, take. Look at the blue circles. Rook for knight and 2 pawns. d4, get the pawns rolling, and this is very, very interesting. This endgame, it looks like white is going to get its pawns rolling. So Nepo is very likely to have gone for this. But Magnus saw it, and it's very, very important here. You attack the rook first, so then this rook doesn't control the b4 square. The rook moves to e3 and knight e6. Let me explain every arrow. Let's have a look. So, knight on e6 controls f4 and d4, so now this break is not possible along with the rook. Again, I've mentioned this pawn on c5 is very important, controlling d4 and b4. This rook continues to defend, and couple of rooks very well placed. Black is holding. Knight g2, stopping black's knight coming into f4. b4. What a move. What a move. And it's so committal. And when you look at this move, at the moment, it's not obvious at all. Why is black playing a move like b4, planning to take, and then you undouble Nepo's pawns? No. It's about getting this rook active. This rook is no longer useful on this file. Look at the blue arrow. If this knight could hop to c4, then this move b4 is absolutely terrible. But it cannot. King e2. And the point of b4 is to go rook b8. You don't want to go c4 here, which is awful. The knight just sits on d4. This knight is superior to the awful knight on g2. You don't want to push your pawn like this. So going back here, king e2. White has to keep the pawn here. Rook b8. This is the point. Magnus is turning it around. He's gone from a pawn down to getting it back and potentially being a little bit better. King d2. Take, take, and now take. If Magnus gets the rook to the second, then he is in business, but Nepo is just in time. King c2 flushes the rook out. h4. 2 rooks, a knight, 5 pawns each. Maybe today, both players, they're feeling nervous. Maybe it's going to fizzle out. King f7, rook e1, blue arrow, I mentioned a couple of moves ago. The knight can sit here, but it's too late. King f6, rook d7, and in this position, no player is willing really to commit. Knight attacks the rook, knight attacks the rook. Rook needs to defend the pawn, that's why Magnus has to keep it along the 6th rank. Knight attacks the rook, and we get a repetition. That is the end of day 1. Draw in the first game. I hope you learned a lot from how Magnus Carlsen plays the Martial Gambit. Check out this brilliant game because Magnus Carlsen has played this opening gambit before. He played it in the Chess World Cup and created this wonderful game, this amazing queen sacrifice. However, you might want to go for the other option, Magnus Carlsen's best queen sacrifice defeat